The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you and enjoy.
I thought I'd start this talk with an oldie but a goodie. Story of a bagpipe player who sort of volunteered his time to, whenever people would ask, he'd play at weddings and funerals and special events. And he was asked by a local minister if he would come and play the bagpipes for a homeless man who died. If he would be willing to come and play. And as always, he said yes. This is sort of his service to the community. And on his way there, he got tremendously lost and didn't ask for questions and went around and around and finally saw the burial site, and no one was there except for the three grave diggers. And he thought, I just want to honor this man, whoever he was. And so he got out of the car and he started playing the bagpipes, and something in him just felt so touched and moved by this sort of unknown person's life, and he played like he hadn't played in a long time. And the gravediggers stopped, and one of them started crying, and then another guy started weeping, and then he was weeping as he was playing, and it was a very powerful moment. At the end of his playing, he just very quietly started packing up and just felt really good about himself. And as he was getting in the car, he heard one of the gravediggers say, "That was amazing." And the other guy said, "I'll tell you, I've never seen anything like it. And I've been putting in septic systems for 20 years. So the title of this talk is Hot Tips for Preparing for Your Inevitable Death. And what I'd like to talk about is how anytime you've been touched by death, there is an invitation to wake up and to see more clearly into the nature of reality. And how important it is to remember that reality, and how we so easily forget. And as you begin to really acknowledge how death is such an integral part of life, and you do remember it, how can that help you adjust course in your life? And how do you stay awake on this path with death as part of your awareness? Imagine we've all been touched by death. I had one particular time when I was in college. I co-managed a 1,000-acre farm in right on the Wisconsin-Illinois border, and we had a neighbor who was a really interesting guy. He was a really kind of a tight-lipped, hardly ever talked. His name was Jim Luty, and we were all vegetarians, living on this farm where we were actually raising animals. And as much as he would grumble and make fun of us, he liked hanging out with us because we just kind of loved him up. He was a real curmudgeon. And he had four heart attacks, and we would always respond and take care of him. And at one point, he was competing in a tractor pull, and I took all these photographs of him and made him a montage after one of his heart attacks. And he really felt a connection with us at the farm. So he called us and said, I've had another heart attack. I need to go to the hospital. So we sort of trundled up there with this old beat-up station wagon, and my friend John was driving, and we put Jim in the back, and I was in the passenger seat, and he was talking very quietly, and it was really hard to hear him, so I kind of turned around to try to hear him better, and I thought, well, maybe I should hold his hand. And then I took his hand, and I thought, oh, he's going to be so embarrassed. So I started to pull away, and then he held on to my hand. I thought, this is really serious. And he was telling me some things about what he wanted to do on his land and so forth. And then suddenly his eyes, and he was looking at me, and his eyes filled with terror. And then his eyes filled with blood. And he vomited. And then later, I always questioned why I just didn't let him go, because it was a massive heart attack. But I just kept saying, Jim, take one more breath. And his eyes were cloudy. And then his eyes cleared up, and he took a breath, and there was something in his eyes. And even when his eyes filled with terror and filled with blood, our eyes were locked. And when his eyes cleared up again, and I don't think I'm making this up, I felt so much love and so much presence coming from him. And our eyes stayed locked, and he would take a breath. I'd say, one more breath, just one more, we're almost there. And it was longer and longer and longer between the breaths. But that whole time, there was such a sense of real love and presence. And then there was sort of this signal that he just couldn't keep going, and then he stopped. It was such a profound, up-close experience that was very, very informative for me. That on the other side, whatever is on the other side of this life, is perhaps, who knows, a doorway to a broader perspective that we can't know. We don't really know what it is. Someone once asked the Zen master, what happens after you die? He said, I have no idea. And the teacher said, but you're a Zen master. He said, yes, but I'm not a dead Zen master. And so we've all lost people. We've all lost pets. And we've all gone through that process. And I was listening to an interview with a Navy SEAL. I think I mentioned this recently. And he talked about how when you're in that level of life and death, death happens all the time. And he said there's actually a protocol. There are actually realizable steps when you lose someone close to you. The first is, it is unimaginable pain. You just think you cannot go on. The loss is so huge. And then you experience that as intense waves. Like the very, very intense waves, and then they cease. And then another intense wave, and then they cease. And then there's a little more space between the waves. And then that space between the waves is filled with guilt, that you're not feeling more intensity. And then the waves get more and more stretched out, and they get smaller, and there's more of a sense of life moving on. And maybe you've experienced something like that. I have found for myself a practice I try to take on when I've experienced someone close to me, losing someone close to me, is that recognition that grief comes in rogue waves. It just comes out of nowhere. Maybe there's a sound or a smell that triggers the memory of this person. And the practice, when I can, is to, when I feel the wave, is to get on the wave and stay on it until I can't find it. And that's been very helpful for me, because it's allowed me to not turn away from the grief. And I feel like I've moved through the grief much more fully. As Khalil Gibran said, unless you grieve fully, you'll cry but not all your tears, and laugh but not all your laughter. So we've all had this experience of being deeply touched in the loss of someone when they die. And then life moves on. And quite often in our culture, we're encouraged to move on. Move on, get on with your life. But actually, many, many spiritual traditions suggest that you linger on that experience and that you actually investigate it. Because there is a lot to learn from looking at the fact of death. When I was in college, I just sold my motorcycle to a friend. And a few days later, I had heard that he had died. And he'd had some kind of a brain swelling during the night, and he was gone. And I remember, again, just that grief and feeling like I need to completely reorient my life. And then falling back into the trance of someone on his way again. So the key to really waking up is really at the core of mindfulness. The very core of mindfulness is this word sati, S-A-T-I, which means to remember. It's all about remembering. When we do concentration practice, we're very tightly remembering our anchor in the here and now. And when we do that, there's a calming and there's a clarity that occurs, and then we can widen the field a little bit. And in that same way, when it comes to really remembering impermanence, we have to look for ways to keep this fresh and alive. I was with a good friend a little while ago, one of my long-term ashram buddies. And for a number of years, she would lead these intensives in Thailand, back in the middle of nowhere. And during one retreat, she was telling me just a little while ago, it was a month-long retreat, and they would do all these different initiation practices. But they were doing a 3-day silent retreat. In the middle of this 3-day silent retreat, toward the end, there was a severe thunderstorm. And there was lightning struck right nearby, and it was terrifying. And they found out that a local villager had died in that lightning strike. And so they went through their rituals of preparing the body for death, and they did the open cremation in the village. So everyone got to attend this cremation. And she told me what a profound experience it was, because they had these musicians who would sort of play different kinds of music. Sometimes it was very chaotic to kind of chase the demons away, but sometimes it'd be like progressively moving higher, as if they were creating a ladder for this being to transcend. And a lot of the early grieving was done, and part of the practice was that you didn't display emotion, because it would disturb this person as they moved on to their next, whatever they move on to. And so she said the whole village and their group just sat in just watching this body be cremated. She said at one point the skull popped from the heat. And she said it was just this riveting moment of just seeing how this body that we hold as permanent is just in transition. So looking closely at death is part of waking up. And it was a big initiation for the Buddha in his life. When he saw sickness, he saw old age, and he saw death for the first time, it initiated this sense of what is beyond death? Is there anything beyond this that we can ascertain? And so part of this practice is based on reality. This is not a a pessimistic or an optimistic path. It's a realistic path. And this practice of remembering impermanence is absolutely critical. And I've shared this before, but I thought we might take a few moments to explore what are called the 5 daily recollections. For some people, they find it very helpful in the beginning of the day to just reflect on these five elements, because they help you to put your life in a different perspective. So if you like, you can close your eyes. And you might just let the words kind of flow through and just sense how they resonate for you. I am of the nature to age and decay. I have not gone beyond aging and decay. I am of the nature to become ill. I have not gone beyond illness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond death. All that is mine, dear and delightful, will change and vanish. I am the owner of my actions. I am born of my actions. I am supported by my actions. And any thoughts, words, or deeds I do, those I will inherit. If you like, you can deepen your breath. And you can let your eyes open. You could say that's kind of a macabre way to start the day. It's not exactly every day in every way I'm getting better and better. But it is a very powerful reminder of how precious this life is. People die all through our life. And I want to mention Barbara Bushkin, who used to sit right there on a regular basis, who I think about a month ago, died quite unexpectedly. It's so interesting how it happens. I remember this was so many years ago. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico at a traffic light on my motorcycle and waiting at a red light, and a big pickup truck blew right by me, right through the red light, and I just saw that. And then a car pulled up next to me, and the window came down, and the person said, "You have no idea what just happened." So that truck was in your lane, and at the very last millisecond, it changed lanes and then went past you and through that intersection. I had no idea. There was a story on here in D.C. of a lumber truck carrying lumber was crossing 495 on an overpass when the load broke and lumber fell onto 495. And there was a young man on his way to work who was killed instantly. And I actually looked up his bio, and this guy, he was hardworking. He went to an Ivy League school. He got a graduate degree. He had a new job and 2 children, just on his way to work. So there are no guarantees. And most people don't want to hang out in this reality because it's just too uncomfortable. So there was a time in my life when I had a pretty close one. I was out hiking. I was hiking barefoot. This is in western Massachusetts. And I got stung by a honeybee. And I kind of stopped and pulled the stinger out. I realized I'd pulled it out the wrong way. I actually injected it into me as I was pulling it out. And I continued going for a hike with my friend, and I was getting more and more flushed, I noticed, and getting really hot. And we kind of made our way down. This was at Kripalu Center, down to the lake, and someone was working on a painting job, and they said, "Are you okay?" I said, "Well, I'm just feeling a little bit flushed." I said, "Let me drive you back to the building." And I thought, no, I'll be fine. And for some reason, this person insisted, really, let me drive you back. So they drove me back, and by the time I got there, I was feeling more flushed. And then another friend of mine, who had been a medic in Vietnam, saw me and said, "Get in the car," and took me to the hospital. And I was going into anaphylactic shock from the honeybee. And there were a few moments in there that were really quite interesting. I began to forget. I didn't know names, but I could remember faces. Things were getting very, very expansive. I remember at one point I thought, I think this may be early graduation. I actually may be dying here. So I thought, well, maybe I should do some chanting. So I started doing some chanting, and suddenly I felt a lot worse. And I thought, well, screw that. Forget the chanting. And then at one point, and I remember this so clearly, we're driving downtown Pittsfield, Massachusetts, and I saw this young woman on a street corner, and she was brushing her hand to her hair, and her hand was just moving like that, slow motion. And I saw that, and then I looked over at the speedometer, and we were going 95 miles an hour. And that's when I realized how my sense of time was dramatically changing. And so we pulled in. I remember kind of aiming for the door handle, and my last thought was, my friend's name, his name was Mukesh, and I said, "Wow, why does Mukesh have to be so touchy-feely?" And I realized, he's dragging me. And then the next thing I remember was looking down at a body, and hearing very clearly the 6 people who were working around this body. And I remember exactly what they were saying. Some guy was yelling, "I want those IVs wide open," and I did not recognize it as my body. I just saw it as a body, and I thought, there is no way they're bringing this body back unless it's the will of God or something like that. And then suddenly it felt like I fell from the ceiling onto the floor, and then I heard the doctor's voice in my ear say, "He's back, we got him." It was quite an experience, and I very quickly tried to forget about it. I just tried to go on with my work. But I found myself going through almost like a depression, of just not really seeing meaning in anything, and nothing made any sense to me. And after a while, I began to feel a kind of a strength and a presence that I hadn't felt before. Just more of a willing to be truthful and present. And it began to show up in very, very powerful ways. There was a sorting of stuff I was doing before that really wasn't satisfying me, and just dropping it, and then getting more excited about things I hadn't noticed before. There was some powerful reorientation from that visit. I'm very grateful for it. but I do carry an EpiPen. I'll ride it to the end and then eject myself, maybe. So if you want to see something sobering, check out an actuarial chart. A good friend of mine sent me one, and I have 18 years, according to that actuarial chart. And 18 years doesn't seem very long to me at all. So we have to prepare ourselves. 151,600 people on the planet die every year, and worldwide that's 2 people per second. And in the United States, every 12 seconds someone dies. Really, when you think about the numbers, it's people just coming and going and into form and out of form. It's really quite extraordinary. So the question becomes, then how do you prepare yourself for your passage? But also, how do you prepare yourself for how you want to live, knowing that your demise is imminent? So there's a little exercise which we've done before, but I'd like to offer this again. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. You might deepen your breath. And I'll be asking you a question, and then you'll have just sort of some space just to notice where the question takes you. It may take you into some successive thoughts. You might like to explore sort of sensitizing yourself to the feelings on the inside. Imagine that you had 1 year to live. What would be most important? What would you do? Imagine you had 1 month to live. What would be most important? What would you do? Imagine you had 1 week, 7 days. Imagine you had 1 day, 24 hours. Imagine you had 1 hour, 60 minutes. Imagine you had 1 minute. Imagine you had 1 breath. And just taking the next minute if you like, you can begin to deepen your breath. And if you'd like, you can open the eyes. That practice can be just a helpful mirror, just a sense, what is most important? And what would you do when the inevitable comes? And many traditions, again, particularly Asian traditions, really focus on death as part of the practice. You may be aware of kind of the Shiva practitioners who kind of covered themselves with ashes and meditate in graveyards. And in the Buddhist tradition as well, kind of a classic place is to meditate in graveyards, or to meditate as the body is being cremated. There's actually a very, very detailed meditation on the stages of decomposition. And again, it's not meant to be gruesome. It's meant to wake us up. You know, as was allegedly said, the Buddha said, "Your house is on fire." You know, it's remembering. And as much as there can be shock and awe, just as there are the classic stages of death, you know, denial, then anger, and then resignation, then accommodation. What happens for so many when we deny this fact, the end of life is quite traumatic. Well, quite often, serious practitioners of meditation, the practice is often described as dying while alive. That is to say, you look closely at your conditioning. You look closely at grasping. You look closely at aversion. You look closely at delusion. And you sense who you are in the absence of that. When you are in conflict with someone, and you remind yourself that this person at some point will die, it changes the equation. When I go to a family reunion, which is one of my least favorite things in the world, I remind myself, what if this was the last time I saw this person? That's a powerful reframe. Whenever you say goodbye to someone, what if this was the last time I saw them? How does that reframe what you would say or how you would hold them? So preparing for your death is very much an internal process. It's about looking at the mental, emotional state that you can cultivate, but it's also a physical process to it as well. And it's something that really struck me when my mother died. My mother was a hoarder, and the family was left with going through all of her collections. And it was quite tragic, and much of her hoarding came from a very deep emotional wounding and so forth. But it definitely inspired me to have my transition be a lot cleaner, if I could. You may be familiar with a book called Death Cleaning. It's a Swedish death cleaning, dovstadning, which is really presented as a very powerful and heartwarming way to reflect toward the end of your life, to look at what you have, to organize yourself in such a way that's going to make it easy for those who are going to clean up your stuff after you're gone. And I've actually found it to be really, really helpful, which includes, looking at my stuff and giving away what I don't need, and looking at my finances and making sure there'll be as little contention as possible when my fabulous fortune is left to my the rest of my family and so forth. There's something about that, the readiness, the willingness to recognize how fragile this life is, that has the possibility of bringing in a great, deep sense of celebration. And it's very interesting how many people on their deathbed, and I've shared this before, the number one regret of the dying is, I wasn't true to myself, which is a very powerful reflection. And if you think of the time you have left on the actuarial chart, and given there may be anything else, any possible day, it becomes a very powerful inquiry as to, knowing you will die, how do you want to live the days that you have left? What will be most important to you? The classic rocking chair test. When you're 102 years old on your rocker, looking back, what will be most important? So I'd like to end with a little meditation. So we'll end with a reflection on this topic. So you might just sense your breath. And with our practice on the breath, it has been said that each exhalation is a dying. And this next breath out is a falling away of the known. This next breath in is a re-arriving. As you sense on the state of your life, on the inevitability of your passing, is there a sense of what is incomplete when you reflect on your relationships? Is there anything unsaid? As you reflect on the inevitable wounds that occur in life, is there anything unhealed that calls for your attention? And as you sense the space between now and whatever that time will come, what most calls you? What enlivens you? What lights you up? Most people, when they receive news of a terminal condition, most people do not drop everything and start a new life. when they choose what they have, but they choose it from a different place, how would you live your life right now, honoring the fragility and the preciousness of it? As you're ready, you can gently deepen the breath. And as you're ready, you can let your eyes open. So while this can be a morose or challenging topic, what it really points to is the miracle of what it means to be alive. The possibility to feel everything we can feel in the senses. The possibility of connecting with others who are alive right now. This fragility opens up the possibility for extreme celebration. Which is why I believe we have cookies tonight. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I'll see you in a number of weeks. Enjoy your cookies, and if you're interested in hearing a little more about the Year of Living Mindfully program, we'll have some of the survivors kind of hang out up here. Have a great night, and look out for the lightning.